Welcome to the Repore Review Podcast, your space for education, conversation, growth, and change. Sandy and Chip, with every brief episode, will take a moment to slow down, reflect, and explore counseling, its challenges, and victories that shape daily lives. Whether you're a therapist, a client, or simply someone on a journey of personal development, you're in the right place. Let's dive in, learn together, and keep moving forward. This is the Repore Review Podcast.
So if you manage substance use treatment services, if you're getting ready for an audit or, just trying to keep your head above water with all the changes in North Carolina, you know how dense those policy documents can be.
They're impenetrable sometimes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're here to cut right through all that bureaucracy and just give you what you actually need to know.
The actionable stuff.
Yes. Today, we're doing a really critical deep dive. We're looking at the big updates to the state-funded and Medicaid Substance Abuse Intensive Outpatient Program. That's SAIOP.
And these changes, they're going to shape everything for the next couple of years through 2025 and 2026.
This isn't just theory. We're breaking down how these shifts are going to hit everything from, your staff's daily workflow all the way to your agency's bottom line.
Right. And maybe before we dive in, we should just quickly define what we're talking about. SAIOP in North Carolina, it's basically what's known everywhere else as ASAM Level 2.1 care.
A structured program.
A very structured program. You've got individual, group, family counseling. It often brings in medication management. And this is key. It requires really intensive service coordination. Everything has to be mapped out in that person-centered plan.
And the sources we dug into, they really paint a clear picture of what the state is trying to do here. It feels like a balancing act.
It is. It's a trade-off.
They're trying to give some administrative relief, maybe some financial help to providers, but in return, they are demanding much, much stronger clinical accountability.
That's the tension right at the heart of this.
Yeah.
I mean, if you boil it all down, the message is we want much stronger clinical justification for everything you do, but we're also trying to help you stay afloat financially.
So how should we frame this for our listeners?
I think it comes down to four main pillars. First, you have these updated, really rigorous clinical expectations that are tied directly to ASM. Second, there are some big clarifications on service authorization, some good news there. Third is telehealth. They're standardizing it, but with limits. And fourth, and this is a big one, rising reimbursement rates that are really designed to support all this expansion.
All right, let's start there with that first pillar, the clinical core. The documents show this massive shift towards, active treatment planning.
Active and evolving. They're clearly trying to move away from this idea of static, passive enrollment.
So where does that start?
It starts at the front door with assessments. Under these new rules, a comprehensive clinical assessment, a CCA, or a diagnostic assessment, a DA, is now a strict prerequisite.
Meaning it has to be done before the first day of service?
Yes,
Good.
Before. Not after, not during. It has to be completed and documented to prove medical necessity right from the jump. This is no longer a best practice. It's a hardline compliance rule.
Okay, so when they say a CCA or a DA, what's the actual difference there for someone running a program? Is one better than the other?
That's a great question. They're not totally interchangeable in practice. The CCA is, kind of the gold standard. It's a really deep dive into everything mental health, SUD, co-occurring stuff.
And the DA?
The DA can sometimes be a bit quicker, more focused on just hitting the diagnostic criteria. But the real takeaway here isn't the name of the form. It's that you have zero flexibility on the timing. A full clinical picture must exist before that client walks in for their first group.
Which stops that old habit of admitting someone on a referral and then figuring out the medical necessity later.
Precisely. And it doesn't stop at the front door. They're also reinforcing this idea of active treatment through continuous assessment. The PCP can't be a static document.
It has to be updated.
Constantly updated. As the person's strengths change, as their barriers evolve, the plan has to evolve with them.
And this is where ASAM becomes really the engine driving all of this?
It's everything. Continued stay in the program is no longer about, they've been here for 30 days. It has to be clinically justified based purely on the ASAM framework.
That is a major shift. So it's not enough for a progress note to just say client attended group and participated.
Not even close. You need data.
How specific are we talking? What do you actually need to write down to justify that continued stay?
They get very specific. The documentation has to show an ongoing need, OR progress, on at least one, And this is the key part, at least one ASAM dimension. Historically, a lot of programs would just live in dimension 5, relapse potential, or 6, the recovery environment.
Right, the obvious ones.
The obvious ones. But these updates force you to look at the whole picture. What about dimension 3, medical conditions? Or dimension 4, withdrawal potential? If your client is medically stable, but their housing is falling apart, your notes have to anchor that continued stay to the housing issue to dimension 6.
But doesn't that create a risk? If you tie it so strictly to ASAM, could you end up pushing people out too soon, especially if they have these big external barriers like housing?
That is the constant tension. And it's why the documentation has to be perfect. The state knows recovery takes time. The key is that the need has to be demonstrable. It has to be evolving.
Meaning you have to be actively working on the problem.
Exactly. You can't just keep someone in group therapy indefinitely because they need housing. The notes have to show that the therapy, the case management, it's all actively working towards solving that housing barrier. The work justifies the stay, not just the barrier itself.
What about the other end of it? Discharge.
Also standardized. Discharge happens when symptoms resolve, goals are met, or the person requests it. But they are very strict about what happens if someone gets worse.
So if a client's needs intensify,
The mandate is an immediate transfer to a higher level of care, residential, detox, whatever is needed. You can't just let someone linger in SAIOP if they're in acute crisis.
so if you're a clinical director listening to this, what is the single biggest takeaway from all this clinical talk?
It's training. You have to invest in training your staff on how to apply and document level 2.1 care properly. You're moving away from time-based care to clinically justified care. Your program survival in an audit now rides completely on that ASAM framework.
That is a high bar. And we know that if you demand more work on one side, you have to give some relief somewhere else. So let's pivot. Section 2, the nuts and bolts, the administrative side. This is where we see some wins for providers.
Right, and the first point of clarity is that mandatory service order. The new rule says a formal order from a clinician, an MD, NPPA, a licensed psychologist, has to be in the file by the first day of service.
Okay, we have to stress that. On file, day 1. What if the doctor who signs off is only in the office on Tuesdays and Fridays? That's a real-world problem.
It creates huge friction, yes. It means your entire intake process has to be redesigned. No more verbal orders that you get signed 3 days later.
So no retroactive fixes.
None. The documents are explicit. If an auditor sees a start date of Tuesday, that order better be dated Tuesday or Monday. It's a clear compliance tripwire.
Okay, now for the change everyone is talking about, the authorization shift.
This is the big one. The biggest administrative win, hands down, is the elimination of prior authorization for initial Medicaid SAIOP services.
And that starts when?
January 1, 2025.
That's monumental. I mean, prior auth has always been such a bottleneck delaying care, but what's the catch? When you remove a hurdle like that, the risk has to go somewhere else, right?
It absolutely shifts the risk. Prior auth was the payer's way of controlling costs up front. Removing it is great for access. It cuts down on paperwork, but it guarantees an increase in post-payment audits. Payers aren't just giving up. They're just moving their review from the front end to the back end. So now the audit question isn't, did you get permission? It's, did you really need to start this person? And was every single day they stayed justified?
That's a critical distinction. It makes intake easier, but raises the stakes for your daily charting.
Precisely. It's a profound shift in mindset. You have to treat every single note like it's going to be Exhibit A in an audit.
Okay, let's touch on telehealth. The message seems to be, we'll allow it, but SAIOP is not becoming a virtual program.
That's exactly right. The core of the service remains in person. The rule says treatment has to be available in person at least 5 days a week.
And the telehealth limit.
Generally, no more than 1 day per week for any single person. And you have to document why it's necessary. Is it a transportation issue? Childcare? It can't just be for convenience. The justification has to be in the PCP.
So it's an augmentation, not a replacement.
Exactly.
Okay, this brings us to where the policy really hits the ground. Section 3. How do you actually go from a 3-day-a-week program to offering services 5 days a week without, burning out your staff and your clients?
Well, first you have to talk about the money that makes it possible. The state knew you couldn't just mandate this without financial support. We saw some rate changes in 2024, but the real driver is the new, much higher Medicaid per diem rate.
What's that going to be?
It's projected to be around $242, and that's set to start January 4, 2026.
Put that number in context. What does that mean for a program director trying to keep good staff?
It's critical. Running a program 5 days a week is a totally different staffing model than 3 or 4. The overhead is higher, you need more people. This rate increase is the state basically saying, we are investing in making this a stable, professional service. It gets the reimbursement closer to the true cost of care.
So without that rate increase, the 5-day mandate is just...
It would have been a non-starter for most agencies. Impossible.
Okay, so the money is there. But how do you structure it? How do you avoid that burnout? The key word seems to be flexibility.
Absolutely. The most critical point is that 5 days of availability does not mean 5 days of identical 3-hour process groups. That would be grueling for everyone.
So the strategy is a tiered week, blending the intensity.
Exactly. The source material lays out a great model for this. Let's walk through it.
Yeah, let's get specific. This is what people need to hear.
So maybe your Mondays and Wednesdays are your core IOP group days. That's the high-intensity, stuff processing, trauma work. Then your Tuesdays and Thursdays are more moderate intensity. Think skills training, psychoeducation, relapse prevention planning.
And Friday?
Friday is the lower intensity anchor. It's for care coordination, medication check-ins, updating recovery plans, maybe a peer support session. This structure lets you meet the 5-day rule while using your staff and your client's time much more effectively.
Okay, that makes sense for the program schedule. But what about the client? Does everyone have to come all 5 days?
No. And this is the most important part of making this work. It's what they call the clinical flexibility model. Attendance frequency is based purely on the client's ASAM-driven clinical need.
So a high acuity client might come
4 or 5 days a week, absolutely. But someone who is stabilizing, maybe stepping down from a higher level of care, they might only need 2 or 3 days.
And an auditor will accept that.
Only if the documentation is rock solid. You have to be able to point to the chart and say, we reduced their frequency to 3 days because they have demonstrated stability in Dimension 4 and are making progress on their housing goals in Dimension 6. It has to be that specific.
It all comes back to documentation.
Every time. This model is about individualizing care, not forcing everyone into the same box.
And to make it all work, you have to know what actually counts as IOP time because you can't just run 5 groups.
A vital point. The definition is broader now. Individual sessions, family counseling, even case consultations about the client's goals. It all counts, as long as you can tie it back to the PCP and an ASAM dimension. This gives you the flexibility to fill those 5 days with a rich variety of intensive services.
Okay, we have covered a ton of ground here. Let's try to boil this down. Let's review those core pillars of the SAIOP update one last time for our listener.
Okay, so Pillar 1 was that push for clinical depth. Strict ASAM justification for everything, starting with that mandatory assessment before day 1.
Right. Then we had operational clarity. Things like the mandatory first-day service order and clear rules for telehealth.
Third was that big win, administrative relief. Getting rid of prior auth for Medicaid, but knowing that just moves the financial scrutiny to post-payment audits.
And finally, the financial support, those rising per diem rates that are designed to make the whole 5-day model sustainable.
Exactly. It's a whole ecosystem. They give you relief here, but they raise the bar over there.
That's a perfect way to put it. The state has given administrative simplification and financial support, but at the same time, they've raised the bar on clinical documentation and operational complexity.
And that tension is where we should leave our listeners with one final thought to chew on. The whole point of this new model is flexibility. That tiered 5-day structure is designed to improve access and prevent burnout. But if flexibility is the key to delivering the service, then rigid, audit-safe documentation is the key to your agency's survival.
So the challenge is?
The challenge is this. As you get more creative, as you use those lower-intensity touchpoints, like a Friday care coordination meeting, how do you make sure your documentation keeps pace? How do you prove, in black and white, that every single one of those flexible services ties back to a specific, evolving ASAM need and a PCP goal?
Marrying clinical flexibility with documentation rigidity.
That is the make-or-break factor for the next few years. That's the whole game.
A challenge worth focusing on. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive. We hope this gave you the shortcut you needed to get ahead of these critical updates.
Thank you for joining today's Repore Review. If this episode connected with you, inspired you, or gave you something meaningful to reflect on, I'd love for you to share it with someone who might need it too. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Until next time, stay grounded, stay growing, and take good care of yourself. This is Antonio, signing off from the Repore Review Podcast.